Hello, my name is Nancy Peace. I'm the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Education Partnership. I'm very pleased to be here today with Chandler Creedon, President of the Franklin Education Association.
Thank you.
I understand that the FEA represents not only teachers but other bargaining units as well. Can you please describe them?
Franklin Education Association represents teachers and nurses. They're in what they call Unit A. Then we represent secretaries, educational assistants, van drivers, cafeteria. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. So, how did you learn about interest-based bargaining?
It's a very interesting question because we did a contract a number of years ago, and I was so disgusted with the way that bargaining went. I was checking with somebody that there had to be some other way of doing this. And at one point I heard about a program, the superintendent at the time said there was a program at Harvard that we might want to look into that had some interest-based bargaining attached to it, and then he left and we didn't follow through with it. But when it came up to negotiate the teacher's contract, I said to the superintendent, we have to do something different. And when the superintendent spoke to the school lawyer, they mentioned that there was this thing called interest-based bargaining, and at the time we looked into it and we found a consultant that would come and do some training, and then, which is what we hired her for, and the school committee paid for half of that and we paid for half of that. And then from there, we were so impressed with the problem-solving approach that we asked her to come and facilitate the rest of the negotiations as we went through with the contract for the teachers and the nurses.
So how recently was that training, and who did the training?
Two years ago, and Mary Ellen Shea did the training for us. We found her, the school department lawyer had her name, and we contacted her and asked her to come and talk to us, and we met with Mary Ellen and the superintendent, and she presented this concept called interest-based bargaining, and it was so much different than what we had been used to. We said, let's try it, and she proposed a training where my negotiating team from the teachers union plus all of the school committee would go through all of the training. And then from there, certain members of the school committee and certain members of administration became part of their team, and then our team of teachers then got together and negotiated the contract using the interest-based bargaining and problem solving.
Terrific. And of course, Mary Ellen is one of the MEP trainers now.
Mm-hmm.
I am curious, though, do you think it was important to have training in order to make the shift
absolutely.
from traditional bargaining
Absolutely.
to IBB?
It was a whole, what I found was it was a whole different approach to bargaining. What bothered me so much the last time when we did the traditional or positional bargaining was the sense that the school committee came in and they would sit on one side of the room, we sat on the other side of the room, their lawyer did all the talking, and when we would propose things, they were like disengaged. And at the time, I remember being really angry because I looked up at one point and saw two of the school committee members on their iPads, and it was like, you're not even hearing what we're saying. And it just was so difficult to get beyond that.
Right.
We did settle. I think that was a year contract, and we did settle it. But so then when we had the training, Mary Ellen was very shrewd in her training.
Okay. Good.
Because one of the things that we found was she said the first night we should have food. And I thought, okay, so we'll have food, and we had it catered for all the school committee and my team. And what she did that I thought was just brilliant of her was she had come in and she had asked us for names of people who were going to be part of the training. Mm-hmm. And she actually set up little tent cards on table. And she set it up so that there was FEA members and school committee members and administration, and she mixed everybody up. So it wasn't us against them in the dinner. And then when we walked in and we had dinner, and then people went back to the tables to sit and eat, the conversation sort of blossomed from that,
Great.
Which was really, that in itself was such a change and took away from that us against them perspective. And so then we decided that we'd eat every time we met. So, but it did. It created a whole different atmosphere, which I think was really pretty amazing.
So even as early as the training, you saw a shift in the relationship.
Absolutely.
Because of that.
And then from the training, she presented that this was more problem solving. Mm-hmm. Let's put the problems on the table, and let's look at that and move from there. How do we solve that? Where do we go with the different problems? Which again was so different than we had experienced in the past.
And so in some ways you were both looking jointly at how do we solve this problem and how do we solve it together, and what are our joint interests or needs with respect to each problem?
And some of what came from that was there were a number of problems that were solved that didn't need to move into a contract.
Right.
Which was fascinating to hear. One of the big issues was a thing on teachers calling in sick in the morning. Mm-hmm. The policy in the past was you had to get up between 5:30 and 6 o'clock and make a phone call to one of the secretaries who that was her job and call in sick. Well, if you're sick, you don't want to get up at 5:30 in the morning to do that. And it was, so how do we solve this? And actually a subcommittee from the negotiating team, both their side and our side, took that upon themselves to look at what are the options, where can we go with that? And actually they came up with a beautiful solution that just then became part of procedure as opposed to needing to go into a contract.
Interesting.
Which was fascinating to watch that happen.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So would you recommend that other teacher unions try interest-based bargaining?
Oh, absolutely.
Based on your experience? And what about for other groups? I know that you've just done training, and now you've had sort of the non-teacher bargaining units that you represent also use this approach to collective bargaining. How did that work out?
It worked well. As a matter of fact, last week we finished the last of 4 contracts.
Terrific. With
the educational assistants using the interest-based bargaining. Again, the problem-solving aspect and the being able to have conversations with people as opposed to this is what's happening,
right,
was so breathtaking to watch that it just made so much sense. And driving over here today, I was reading a book, and one of the things it talked about was when people become marginalized and you don't feel part of the problem solving. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what the traditional bargaining that we had experienced in the past really was, is that you're the people who cause problems because you want a pay raise and you want all this stuff. And we as management don't necessarily want to give that to you, and they wouldn't hear what the problems were. So by sitting down and really looking at what the problems are, we avoided that, which was just a breath of fresh air.
Well, and from a presentation that I heard you give more recently in Williamstown, I recall that you had a sort of dramatic approach to helping the school committee and the administration understand, particularly the work of the cafeteria workers. Is that?
Oh, absolutely.
Can you explain that to the viewers?
It was really interesting that since we were looking at problem solving, what we began to do is as we started the conversation, and that's the word I guess I would use is conversation. As we started the conversation, I asked each of the groups to explain to the administration and explain to the school committee members what is it their job entailed. So the cafeteria folks, I asked them to bring pictures of the boxes that they have to unload and put in the freezer and put in the different pantries and so forth. And they brought pictures in, and it showed, this box weighs 75 pounds, and you have these little cafeteria ladies moving all this around. And the people from the school committee said, really? We didn't realize that you had to do that. We figured somebody else did that. Or that you had to unload, the trucks would come in and they would drop it and then they had to put it away. Mm-hmm. Or even the educational assistants, all that they have to do to make the school work. A lot of people saw them as extra help. Right. And as they began to explain, well, we're assigned certain assignments to be with teachers and to be with students, but if the principal needs us to cover a class, or if the principal needs us to do this, we're pulled at a moment's notice to go cover that class. And it breaks up, or it's not really consistent timing, and it bothered them. And as people heard that and they understood the job, again, it made the problem solving and the conversations flow much easier and much better. But it really took that time to explain that to everybody.
Right. In a sense, everybody was working from joint knowledge too,
Right.
then, and joint understanding of the problem.
Right.
That's terrific. So that, based on this experience, I take it you would recommend using IBB both for non-teaching bargaining units as well as teaching bargaining units.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. And if I could maybe give you another example, when the cafeteria people got close to settling, the school committee gave the percentage numbers, and the cafeteria said, oh, but what about if we just change it a little bit? And instead, I think it was like a 1.5, a 2, and a 2.5 that they settled for. And they said, could we move that 2 to the front end? Because that would help. And of course, people sort of reacted and said, but the budgets have been established. But one of the school committee women said, that can't be a lot of money. Let's do it. Because she was so impressed with the work that she heard these folks doing. She didn't twist their arm, but she said to them, we should be able to figure this out. And so they were able to do that. And again, I think that came from the problem solving and being tolerant to hear what the problems were and to be able to hear the conversation.
And to really, in a sense, put herself in their shoes.
Absolutely.
There's that level of understanding. Well, since you've had IBB experience now for a couple of years within the Franklin School District, have you seen any impact of that training on the general day-to-day relationship between the parties?
Oh, absolutely.
Can you explain?
From the superintendent decided last year that my vice president and I would meet at least once a month with her to discuss some labor management issues. That was increased to twice a month at the end of last year because there just seemed to be so many things happening. And then she spoke to me earlier this year, and what she's asked the principals to do in every building is to develop a labor management meeting in their schools between the principal and the building representatives from the FEA, so that they can discuss and talk about what's going on in individual buildings before it gets to a point where somebody gets frustrated and then they call me and I call the superintendent, and then that usually causes other issues to happen. So by doing this, and the other part to that was the superintendent felt that by setting up these labor management within the buildings, it also helps with this new teacher evaluation system that's come into place for the teachers in Massachusetts. And she actually is asking the principals to let her know when these are going to occur, because she wants to go and visit some of them to see how it's working and to see what the conversations are.
That's
huge for us. That's a huge step forward that I think has grown from the interest-based bargaining. And I guess as I say that, I want to take a step back. One of the things that I think has allowed us to be really successful with interest-based bargaining is the conversations that we're having and the ability that we have to be able to trust one another. That was one of the things I felt hurting when I came back into the job as president, was there was such animosity between the FEA and the superintendent and administration and the school committee that it was very difficult for people to have conversations with one another. So we've spent a lot of time developing that sense of trust, developing that sense of being able to have those conversations, which has allowed the interest-based bargaining to be so effective.
But I'd like to pursue that a little further, because sometimes folks will say, well, we can't do interest-based bargaining because we don't have a high level of trust. Do you think that a high level of trust is a necessary precursor, or do you think that, in fact, the IBB training and working in that mode can actually start to build trust even where the trust doesn't exist?
Oh, absolutely. I believe that the interest-based bargaining and the training helps establish that trust, and it then work. I think you then work together to build on that trust. The trust piece and the trust and conversation becomes so important, and I think the interest-based bargaining helped us develop a tool set that allowed for the conversations to occur and to do the problem solving.
So that you made some agreements about how you would operate,
Right.
and then you stuck to those agreements.
Right.
And then that made the trust
Right.
increase.
I think you're correct. The ground rules that we established and how we began to frame problems became essential.
Okay, great.
To do interest-based bargaining, you need a lot of those flip charts to be able to really frame the issue and frame the problem so that everybody's speaking the same language.
And also seeing the same information at
Right.
the same time, which is another reason, of course, that we like
Yes.
to use the flip charts.
Yes.
We are famous. Well, I could also use projecting with a computer. So I want to go back to the meetings with the teachers and the building reps and the principals. Have they had, any of them had training in interest-based bargaining?
That's something that we're going to do sort of in-house now. They weren't part of the initial training that we did, but that's something that we will do, and we will work with them as the year begins.
That's
Right.
terrific. Because one of the things I've been thinking about, and I don't know if you think, is perhaps even doing trainings for the entire school community. So
That'd
all
probably-
teachers and anybody that wanted to come, school
Right.
district, whatever.
That would probably be very helpful.
Okay, I'll have to think about that
As
some
you
more.
think about it, maybe we'll take you up on that once we.
You can be a demonstration project for us to try that. Well, before we finish up, I'd just like to ask you, is there anything that you would like to say to your fellow union presidents or union members about either interest-based collective bargaining as a contract process or trying to work collaboratively with with administrators and school committee, or any other thoughts that come to you as a result of this conversation?
It's interesting that when I was at Williams this summer with the MTA in their summer conference, and I mentioned interest-based bargaining, some people really reacted to that, and I don't know if that's because in the past they've had bad experiences with it, and when I asked them about what it was that they didn't like, the piece that seemed to resonate for me was they didn't seem to have a lot of training, and maybe they just sort of jumped into it without really thinking about what they were doing, and therefore it didn't work as well. Because I think being able to have those conversations, to be able to look at it from a problem solving as opposed to we're holding the purse strings and we're not going to hear what you're asking, doesn't work. It was a horrible experience for us. And being able to look at this from the perspective of, okay, we have a problem. And maybe part of that goes back to my belief that education is the sacred principle, and it's not we against you as administrators or school committee against teachers or secretaries or whatever. We have to do this together. If we're going to be successful, we have to work at this together and look at the problems and figure out where are we going to go with this? How are we going to solve it? What's in the best interest of everybody?
But in terms of representing your constituents, I mean, I think one of the criticisms sometimes of interest-based bargaining is that people are afraid that it's going to be soft bargaining, and that people are, that you're going to have to. Well, it's either two concepts: either it's like everybody can get everything they want, it's win-win, a term I hate, or that somehow the union is disadvantaged and the bargaining team doesn't represent its constituents fully as they might in a more traditional adversarial bargaining situation. Would you like to comment on that?
But I think when you look at it from the perspective of a problem, it doesn't have to be win-win. It's realistic. So we made concessions as far as new people coming on the job, and while they were concessions, our feeling was that people would know those coming into the job, and they could then make the decision whether they wanted to work for Franklin or not to work for Franklin. So they knew that up front. And by doing that, we didn't have to make huge changes for people who are currently employed, but that allowed it to be more sustainable. I don't like the fact that we had to do that for some of the new people coming on board. But for me, it was, this is how best to solve that issue. And hopefully, maybe in the future, when the economy changes, maybe the next time they negotiate a contract, they can go back and revisit those kinds of things, some of those money issues. Right. But at least by doing the problem solving, we could hear each other, right, as opposed to, we're not, you're not offering us enough money, we don't even want to hear from you.
Right. And since you have 4 ratified agreements, I'm assuming your constituents felt that they also were benefiting from this agreement, these agreements that you've been able to.
We have one to ratify.
One to ratify, oh, sorry.
but other than that, I think their contract, and it's interesting because it was with the educational assistants, and we were looking for a 3-year contract. We actually have a 1-year and a 3-year. With a 1-year contract, the immediate 1-year contract is a slight increase in salary. Mm-hmm. And then the 3-year contract changes substantially job descriptions and assignments and that sort of thing, again, to make things sustainable. But it also, by doing that, it also increased their hourly rate.
Terrific. Which
I think is going to benefit them in the long run for people who are going to be there a long time. And it's very different, but I think we can show them that actually they will benefit from that.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much for participating in this interview today.
My pleasure.
And I hope that people listening to this video will consider doing interest-based bargaining and looking at collaborative process and interest-based processes. And feel free to contact me at the Massachusetts Education Partnership. Our website is www.massedpartnership.org. Thank you.